Picture Rome at dawn. You're a citizen, and the toga is your public badge, a soft, awkward sign that you belong in civic life. You leave your doorway and drift with a morning flow toward the forum, past porticos and shop fronts that are just waking up. You hear speeches in the distance, watch practiced hand gestures, and follow procedures that once felt decisive. Then something quietly unsettling clicks into place. The men with real status, those greeted by name, those with clients behind them, already seem to know who will win. Not necessarily because there's a secret plot today, but because the way power moves has shifted while the surface still looks familiar. The ballot matters, but it feels like it confirms an agenda rather than setting one. Meet our guide, Lucius, a composite small shopkeeper who sells oil and lamp wicks near the forum. He's not a senator or a general. He's a working Roman who experiences politics as friction, permits, prices, inspections, and the constant question of who can help when something goes wrong. When a supplier shortchanges him, when a rival complains, when a clerk misplaces a request, Lucius doesn't solve it with a heroic speech about liberty. He solves it by finding a patron, a recommendation, or a friend of a friend who can say, "He's with me." So here's our mission: in one place and one time, Rome under the age of Augustus, 27 BCE to 14 CE. Augustus doesn't call himself Rex, a king. On paper, the Senate still meets, magistrates still hold office, elections still happen, and courts still operate. But in practice, the levers that decide outcomes are concentrated: durable military command, the ability to start or stop political business, patronage that makes careers, administrators who manage food and public order, and gatekeepers who control access to decisions. We'll follow Lucius through ordinary moments, voting, petitioning, and simply trying to keep his shop open, and watch how the people beyond the emperor can change his options before breakfast. If a detail is debated, we'll say so. If we can't source it, we won't use it. By the end, you'll be able to point to the real controllers: senators who steer honors, equestrian managers who run the engine room, prefect who enforce order, and household staff who decide who gets hurt. Starting now, Lucius feels that difference, and that feeling is where our investigation begins today. Welcome to the age of Augustus, 27 BCE to 14 CE, when Rome moves toward one-man leadership while keeping the outward forms of the Republic. Augustus does not style himself as Rex, a king, and he rarely talks like a conqueror. Instead, he presents himself as Princeps, the first man, a leader inside the system rather than above it. That distinction matters, because Rome is obsessed with legitimacy. Romans have a deep allergy to kings, a long memory of civil war, and a habit of expressing power through offices, votes, and ritual. So the stage stays standing, the Senate meets, magistrates wear their insignia, elections appear on the calendar, and courts keep hearing cases. And yet, for people like Lucius, the practical question is simple: when you need something done, who can actually do it? Who can get your petition read, your tax dispute heard, your contract approved, or your neighbor's complaint dismissed? In this period, power is less about shouting the loudest in the forum and more about controlling the pathways that lead to decisions. Think of it like a city with the same street signs, but the traffic now flows through a few guarded intersections. Augustus holds the biggest intersection, but he does not stand there alone. He relies on senatorial elites who want stability, equestrian administrators who run the engine room, and urban officials who keep the city functioning. He also relies on a household of secretaries, clerks, and attendants who manage access, timing, and paperwork. None of these people need to announce themselves with a crown. They can change your life by moving your file up, down, or into a drawer. Lucius begins to notice the pattern on days like this. He watches which candidates receive confident greetings from powerful men, which names appear in the right places, and which speeches seem almost ceremonial. He feels the shift is a new kind of uncertainty, not the fear of open violence in the streets, but the anxiety of invisible limits. Today we're going to map those limits from the ground up. We'll start with the constitutional-looking settlements that put Augustus at the center, then trace the social and administrative machinery that makes that center real in everyday Rome. Historians argue about how cooperative this arrangement was, but few deny the direction. More decisions are made before the public moment. Watch it happen. Right now. To understand who controlled Rome, start with a move that made everything else possible: the settlement of 27 BCE. Fresh from Civil War victory, publicly stages a return of authority to the Senate and the Roman people. It is a political performance, but not a fake one. The Senate really does matter, and Romans really do care about constitutional language. The trick is what happens next. The Senate votes him a special package: honors, the name Augustus, and a long-term command over key provinces. These are not random provinces. They are the places where the bulk of Rome's legions are stationed, meaning the biggest organized force in the state sits under one umbrella of legal authority. Lays out this arrangement with unusual clarity, and Augustus later frames it as restoration in his. Most historians agree on the bottom line, even when they debate the tone. The old institutions stay visible, but the center of gravity shifts. If you control provincial command and the armies attached to it, you do not need to abolish elections to shape outcomes in Rome. Now bring this back to Lucius. He doesn't see legions marching through the forum every day, and Augustus is careful not to look like a military dictator inside the city. But Lucius hears the logic in everyday conversation. The man who can ultimately command the state's force is the man you don't casually oppose. That changes how senators compete with each other, how magistrates interpret their duties, and how ambitious families plan marriages and alliances. It also changes how ordinary people read politics. Your ballot might still count, but if the largest levers, army, provinces, and long-term appointments are already aligned with one person, then the range of possible outcomes is narrower than the rituals suggest. And notice how subtle this is. Rome keeps its familiar vocabulary: consul, praetor, senate decree, popular assembly. Augustus doesn't need a throne in the forum. He needs something quieter, legal authority that outlasts yearly office, plus the reputation that makes everyone treat that authority as normal. In modern terms, the Constitution stays on the wall, but the wiring behind it has been rerouted. And once the wiring changes, the people who control access to that wiring, advisors, administrators, patrons, and clerks, become the real hands on the switches. That's the first hinge point. And Rome adjusts around that. Now jump to 23 BCE, a year ancient sources treat as a turning point. Augustus stops holding the consulship year after year, but he does not step away from control. Instead, he relies on a bundle of powers that look traditional on the surface and unstoppable in combination. First is tribunician power, tribunicia potestas, renewed again and again. That package carries the aura of the people's protector. It lets him propose business, convene, veto, and present himself as a guardian of citizens without wearing the consul's robe every January. Second is his proconsular authority in the provinces, described by ancient writers as superior to other governors and commonly summarized as imperium maius. Translation for Lucius: even if another official has the title on paper, the princeps can step in, override, or absorb the decision. It is not a single new office with a flashy name. It is Roman power reassembled into one coordinating center. This is why the system feels familiar and different at the same time. Augustus can say honestly that magistracy still exists and laws still have forms. And he can also ensure quietly that no magistracy becomes a rival power base. Augustus explains his own story in the Residential Gesti. He emphasizes that he excelled all others in auctoritas, social authority, and he insists that he did not hold more official power than colleagues in office. Historians do not read that as a literal scoreboard. They read it as messaging. The Republic is the language, but auctoritas is the force that makes the language obey. Lucius experiences auctoritas in small moments. A clerk answers faster when a famous name is mentioned. A neighbor's complaint fades when the right patron raises an eyebrow. A judge listens differently when a witness is connected. No soldiers are required for any of that. Power works through expectation, reputation, and the knowledge that the center can intervene if necessary. By the time Lucius returns to the voting line, he starts to understand why the result feels settled. The decision is not made by one dramatic command. It is produced by a web of powers that make some outcomes easy and others almost impossible. Most Romans could accept this because it came wrapped in tradition. You could still call Augustus a first citizen while treating his word as final. The costume stayed on stage, but the script was edited backstage, quietly, daily. So if Augustus is the apex, who are the hands below him inside Rome? Start with the Senate because it still matters, and because its cooperation is part of what makes the new system feel legitimate. Senators debate, pass decrees, sit on juries, and govern provinces. But their room to maneuver is shaped by two realities. Augustus controls the biggest levers, and he can reward or sideline careers over the long term. That makes the most important question not who is the bravest speaker, but who is acceptable to the center. Lucius sees this in the way elite names carry weight in public, and in the way lesser men angle for introductions instead of open confrontation. Ancient sources describe Augustus taking a direct interest in the Senate's composition and dignity, including efforts to regulate membership and behavior. Whatever the exact mechanics in a given year, the pattern is clear. A Senate that wants stability will police itself, and Augustus can guide the policing. Then there are elections. They continue under Augustus, and candidates still campaign, but endorsement becomes the invisible currency. An ambitious man does not only need votes, he needs to avoid displeasing the circle that can block the next step in his career. That changes political style. Instead of constant rivalry played out in the open, you get cautious competition, flattery, and the careful reading of signals. Writing later famously portrays the early Principate as a time when freedom narrowed without a single dramatic coup. Modern historians argue about tone, emphasizes revolution, while others stress continuity and bargain, but few deny that centralization shaped behavior. For Lucius, this is not abstract theory. It shows up when a senator's client pushes to the front of a line, when a magistrate's clerk returns a favor, when a merchant suddenly wins a contract because someone powerful recommended him. These are small actions, but they teach a lesson. Power lives in the ability to allocate attention. If you can decide who gets heard first, you can decide who wins more often. And once that becomes normal, citizens adjust. They still vote, still cheer, still complain, but they invest their real energy in relationships, not in the illusion of an open contest. Lucius learns to watch the Senate doors like a weather vane. When they open for you, day feels good. When they stay shut, you shrink. Always. Now zoom from institutions to the social machine that makes institutions move, patronage. Rome runs on the logic of help, and help is rarely free. A patron offers protection, introductions, and sometimes cash or legal support. A client offers respect, votes, publicity, and the steady signal that a powerful man is powerful. This is older than Augustus, but under Augustus, it becomes even more important, because it's the safest way to compete in a world where direct confrontation with the center is risky. Lucius knows this before he can explain it. He knows that if he wants his complaint heard, the first question is not what's the law, but who will stand beside me when I say it. Watch him on a typical morning. Before his shop opens, he walks to a patron's doorway for the salutation, the morning greeting. He waits. He keeps his posture respectful. He learns to read tiny signals, a nod, a pause, the sound of a name being spoken inside. None of this is written on a law tablet, but it shapes outcomes as surely as a statute. Because once a patron has acknowledged you, your requests travel differently. A clerk recognizes your name. A neighbor thinks twice before starting a fight. A lender offers better terms, because risk changes when status changes. This is control that feels personal, not political, and that's why it's powerful. It turns inequality into habit. It also turns loyalty into infrastructure. Augustus sits at the top of a patronage pyramid, and many senators and equestrians build smaller pyramids beneath him. If you want to climb, you don't just work hard. You attach yourself to a chain of introductions that leads upward. Modern scholars have emphasized that many people experienced imperial rule through access rather than through dramatic decrees. That means the people who regulate access, friends, patrons, secretaries, doorkeepers, become authorities in their own right. For Lucius, the most stressful sentence in Rome is not no. It is come back later, because later depends on who is willing to remember you. So when Lucius returns to the voting line, he still votes, but he no longer expects voting to be the main way his life changes. He expects it to be relationships. And in a system like that, the hallway to power can matter more than the room. Lucius learns the hallway rules. Fest. Patronage is the social channel, but someone still has to run the paperwork. That brings us to a group most tourists forget and most shopkeepers fear, the equestrian administrators. Senators chase honor and high office. Equestrians often run the engine room. Under Augustus, men of equestrian rank hold major administrative and financial roles, including positions that touch ordinary Romans directly. Think taxes, contracts, supply chains, building projects, and the daily decisions that turn a policy into a routine. For Lucius, an equestrian official is not a distant celebrity. He's the person whose assistant can delay your permit, approve your bid, or reopen a dispute you thought was finished. This is power that arrives with a wax seal instead of a speech. Rome also develops a stronger culture of appointed urban management. Instead of relying only on annually elected magistrates, the regime uses longer-serving officials and commissions to keep the city predictable. The point is not to invent a modern bureaucracy overnight. The point is to create continuity. Continuity is control, because it outlasts one election and one argument. Consider food supply. Keeping Rome fed requires storage, shipping, ration lists, and inspections. Ancient writers remember Augustus treating shortages as a serious problem, and the administrative response necessarily empowers the people who supervise distribution. If Lucius is hungry, constitutional theory is not his concern. He wants to know who controls the tokens, the schedules, and the door to the storehouse. Now consider public order. Rome is crowded, flammable, loud, and always one bad accident away from crisis. Augustus strengthens urban oversight, and later in his reign Rome gains organized services for night watch and fire response. That means rules posted on walls, fines issued by officials, and patrols that shape where Lucius feels safe after dark. Notice what has happened. We started with an emperor who insists he is not a king. We arrived at a city where appointed managers can redirect your day with a signature, a stamp, or a simple instruction. Beyond the emperor, these administrators are how rule becomes touchable. They are the hands that translate the center's priorities into your morning. Lucius learns their names the way sailors learn winds. Not because he admires them, but because his rent depends on them. One nod from an office runner can move his case forward. One shrug can quietly freeze it for weeks, without breaking any law. It sticks. Power reaches deepest when it moves into private life, and Augustus does exactly that through law. Ancient sources report that he promoted legislation on marriage, adultery, and childbearing among citizen groups, presenting these measures as moral reform and social renewal. Suetonius and Cassius Dio both discuss the broad agenda, and modern historians still debate how consistently such laws were enforced in practice. But even uneven enforcement can reshape behavior, because the point is not constant punishment, the point is pressure. Law creates incentives, and incentives create habits. Start with reputation. Rome is a status culture, and status is political capital. If adultery becomes a public legal category, then gossip can turn into a case. If marriage and childbearing become tied to privileges or penalties, then family strategy becomes state strategy. That changes alliances, inheritances, and who is considered respectable enough to hold office or receive patronage. Lucius is not an elite bridegroom negotiating a dynasty, but he still lives in the blast radius. His sister's marriage prospects affect his connections. A scandal in a patron's household can change which doors are open to clients. Even the rumor of investigation can make people back away from you, because they don't want to share your risk. Now add the courts. Rome is a legal culture with procedures, advocates, juries, and endless paperwork. Under Augustus those forms continue, but outcomes depend on attention and priority. Many disputes never become famous cases. They become files that move or do not move. In such a system, intermediaries matter. Clerks decide whether your petition is complete. Officials decide whether your case is urgent. Influential patrons decide whether to show up and make the room take you seriously. The result is a kind of quiet enforcement. No one needs to threaten Lucius with violence. They can threaten him with delay, expense, and social isolation. And because Rome teaches people to treat hierarchy as normal, mos maiorum, the custom of the ancestors, many accept the pressure as how the world works. Augustus can claim he is restoring morals and order, and many Romans can believe him, because belief is comfortable when it matches stability. For Lucius, the lesson is blunt. The law is not just what's written, it's who can activate it against you. And once you know it can be activated, you start behaving as if it already is in the background. That is the point. Now look up from law books to the city itself, because Rome under Augustus is also a message you can walk through. Augustus restores temples, sponsors new monuments, and fills public space with images that connect his rule to tradition, peace, and divine favor. He also gathers religious authority into his public persona, including the role of Pontifex Maximus late in the Republic's old priestly hierarchy. The effect is not simply decoration. It is education by environment. Every inscription, relief, and ritual teaches citizens what is safe to praise and what kind of ambition are acceptable. Suetonius credits Augustus with massive building and restoration, and Augustus himself lists public works and gifts in the Residential Gesti as proof of service. Argues that Augustan images and architecture train people to experience the new order as natural, almost like the city was endorsing it. Do not imagine cartoon mind control. Imagine repetition. Lucius walks past a gleaming facade on his way to work. He sees a relief that celebrates peace and family. He watches a procession where the official story is performed in daylight. No one has to shout at him to believe. The message is embedded in stone. Rome is orderly, pious, and guided. And if the city is guided, then the guide must be legitimate. This also shapes the behavior of elites. A senator can compete for honor, but he competes inside a landscape that constantly reminds him who restored Rome. Public praise becomes a survival skill, and public silence becomes a kind of wisdom. For ordinary people, the effect is simpler. Stability starts to feel like the default setting of the world. When stability feels natural, questioning it feels awkward, even ungrateful. That is why monuments are a lever of power beyond the emperor's personal decisions. They operate when he is asleep. They influence children before they can vote. They set the tone for what a normal Rome looks like, and whoever defines normal defines the boundary of possible. Lucius may never meet Augustus, but he meets Augustan Rome every day. And that daily encounter teaches him the same lesson as the voting line. The system is not shouting, but it is speaking constantly. When Lucius passes the or the, he sees law, family, and victory presented as one story with one author. And the author wins. Everywhere, daily. Let's pull the camera back and answer the mechanical question. How does the system work? First, who has power? At the top is Augustus, armed with tribunician authority, superior provincial command, and unmatched prestige, what Romans called auctoritas, the social gravity that makes people adjust before you even speak. Those powers matter because they last. Annual magistracies rotate. Augustus' package persists, so the center stays the center. Below him sits the senatorial elite. The Senate still governs in real ways. It debates, issues decrees, sits in courts, grants honors, and supplies many governors. It is not a cardboard prop. But its freedom is shaped by two realities. One, the princeps can intervene legally when he chooses, because his authority can outrank other commands. Two, he can shape careers over time through recommendation, access, and the distribution of prestige. That changes what dissent looks like. Instead of open fights for power, many disputes shift into safer, coded forms, silence, delay, and careful agreement. Alongside senators are equestrian administrators and prefects, the engine room. Senators compete for honor. Equestrians often manage money and the routine administration that turns policy into daily life. They oversee finances, contracts, tax processes, public works, and logistics. If you're Lucius, a shopkeeper, an equestrian office is where your permit gets stamped, your dispute gets scheduled, and your contract becomes real. A neat hand and a wax seal can move your week. Then come urban services and street-level officials who enforce order through notices, inspections, and fines, plus the quiet power to say no. This is boring power until it touches you. A posted rule that bans stalls on a street changes where you sell. An inspection that finds a problem changes your costs. A curfew notice changes when your family feels safe outside. Threaded through everything is access. The imperial household and the wider network around it. Secretaries, clerks, attendants, friends, patrons, and intermediaries who manage timing. Even when our sources don't name every gatekeeper in Augustus' circle, the logic is unavoidable. If the emperor's decision matters, then whoever controls the path to that decision holds power. Sometimes the harshest verdict isn't denied. It's come back tomorrow, because tomorrow can mean never. Second, how is this enforced? Usually without drama in the streets of Rome. Enforcement is administrative, social, and legal. Appointments decide careers. Paperwork decides permissions. Courts decide reputation. Grain schedules decide calm. The key legal ideas are the bundled powers that make intervention legitimate, tribunician authority and superior imperium in the provinces, plus the prestige that turns suggestion into command. Add social legislation, and pressure can look like virtue instead of fear. Notice what's missing: constant street terror. The system works best when it feels like procedure. You don't see Augustus in every alley, but you feel him when an official says, "I can't approve this without guidance," and that guidance flows upward. Even monuments do administration. They remind you what the regime claims to deliver, so compliance starts to feel like common sense day after day. Third, how does this change everyday life? You can still vote, hear speeches, go to court, and watch senators debate, but the range of outcomes is shaped upstream by who controls resources and access. Politics doesn't vanish. It relocates to offices, thresholds, and recommendation chains. Finally, why do people accept inequality? After civil war, the exchange is compelling: peace, predictability, and bread that arrives on time, with institutions that still look recognizably Roman. Elites keep honor and property. Many ordinary people get fewer shocks and more routine. Tradition helps too. Romans are trained to see hierarchy as normal. Patronage adds hope. Attach yourself to the right chain, and you might rise one step. Back to Lucius. When a supplier accuses him of debt, the Republic story says, "Trust the law." The lived Rome says, "Find who will vouch for you." A patron's nod makes a clerk find your file. A manager's seal makes your contract real. A posted notice changes your route home. That is control beyond the emperor. Layered power translating big authority into daily constraints. Modern takeaway: non-political and timeless. Watch who controls entry, paperwork, resources, schedules, and reputation. If this helped, like, subscribe, and tell me which lever surprised you most.